start recording now.
I'm going to record it now. So we are live right now, everybody, and good morning. Good morning. I'm Dave Christensen. I'm with Harvey Castro. I am the director of the Harvey Muck Photo Center in San Francisco. Unfortunately, we are closed today because of the COVID-19, but we hope to be open hopefully this late summer. We hope you're well. And a little bit of information about Harvey, which this project is really interesting. I really, really love it. I'm sure you will. We're recording this, so if you can't come on today, we will have it up on our website. When I first saw Harvey's work, I was immediately drawn to the layers and the multiple layers of content and the emotion that he extracts in his images. This beautiful body of work focuses on the survivors of Hurricane Maria, the horrific storm that engulfed Puerto Rico in 2017. What rises to the surface in his images is his reverence for humanity and empathy. Documenting sheer perseverance, Harvey distills the dignity of the spirit that remains given the challenges so layered between the pain, loss, coupled with the will for basic human survival. Once we observe and take in these photographs, we are forever altered with how we look and feel about these people and how they cope with their challenges. I trust you will enjoy this rich collection of the photographs as much as we do. And on that note, I'd like to introduce you to Harvey Castro.
Hey everybody, Harvey Castro, photographer, born in Nicaragua, been in the States since 1982. First of all, I want to say thank you, Dave, for setting this up and really championing this effort of making sure that people get to hear a little bit about the stories that I was privileged to be part of in this trip. But the way I wanted to go about it today was a couple things. I wanted to first show a little video put together with the voices of some of the folks that we interviewed while we were there. Short video, about 3 minutes. And then I want to go into really how we got to this point, right? The Harvey Milk Photo Center, at the end of the day, it's also, it's a center for photography, right? So some of the folks that we have joining us also want to know about gear and, how I got to this point and making the connections and all that. So I hope that in the narration of how, all different things of my life have essentially driven me and drove me to being in Puerto Rico in 2018 to help document some of these stories. It's all been related, right? So why don't I start with the video? So again, this is a short little video.
That sounds great.
And let me share that now.
While Harvey's sharing that too, I want to inject, we do appreciate all your support. We have formed a nonprofit with Harvey Friends of the Harvey Muck Photo Center. So we greatly appreciate any contributions and donations, which will allow us to continue these type of webinars and live exhibits when we do get there. So just check out our website. We do appreciate all your support. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. And let me know if you can see a black screen with the video.
I hear something. There it is. I see it.
Great.
I see it.
Let me go ahead. Perfect. So let's go with that.
¿Por qué los campos no lo visitan? El pueblo es un pueblo. El pueblo, el hospital está cerca. En el pueblo tienes todo cerca. En los campos no. Porque en los campos no hay nada. Aquí no hay médico, aquí ni nada.
Puerto Rico no está restablecido totalmente. No, aquí mismo en el barrio tenemos un sector en la misma comunidad que no tiene todavía luz. Son personas mayores. El otro barrio de allá, de Salientito, tampoco. No hay nada, ni esperanza, ni camiones, ni lo que tú puedas decir, nada.
Eso era para mí un tornado. Se unieron aquí, ahí fue cuando destrozó todo. El techo lo arrancó completo, se lo tiró allá al mango, me partió ese mango, partió parte de una ceiba que hay ahí.
I was struck by the amount of need when I came here that I wasn't anticipating. And one, there's a lot of need in just the physical reconstruction, re-roofs, new builds, but there's also a need in collaboration and communication between people.
I was talking to somebody from the University of Carlos Albizu with whom we do partner, and I was talking to her about the fact that even mental health can become an epidemic.
Yo soy asmática, yo padezco de epilepsia, yo soy diabética.
In the mainland United States and the island here, there's a disconnect. They are part of the United States, but there's a huge disconnect between the populations.
¿De FEMA, sí, cuánto es?
600.
600 pesos. Y eso no da ni por una nevera.
La insulina es una cosa que se baña. Y un mínimo potecito así de insulina vale $325.
There is a lot of elderly that are alone in their homes. The trauma of the hurricane, it triggered mental health illnesses, Alzheimer's, depression, and like general dementia in some of our elderly people.
Mi vida no es fácil. Lo primordial para mí es mi mamá. Y desde que mi mamá se enferma, yo no tengo vida.
Yo sabía que ya venía un huracán porque ya yo tengo experiencia espiritual para ello, lo que llaman psíquico, pero que no esperaba que fuera tan fuerte.
The metaphorical bridges we build, I think, are often as important, if not more, than the physical building projects that we build.
El favor, eso que te están haciendo, están tratando de hacer, eso es lo que vale. Porque puede tener millones de pesos en un banco y eso no vale nada. Y si no tiene salud, menos. Porque tú puedes poseer lo que poseas, pero si no tienes salud, no tienes nada.
Okay, we're back.
It's a very moving piece of film, Harvey.
Thanks, Dave. So yeah, you know, one of the two topics that were a thread between all of the families that we spoke to while we were there, or the two topics that constantly came up. One was the community support, right? Everybody binding together to move ahead, to rebuild, and taking pride in that. And the other thing, you know, which was very consistent as well with the different families that we spoke to throughout the island, was the issue with mental health, you know, and not getting enough attention. You know, there were organizations that would come out and you know, check in with people, but out in the mountains, in the area that was not easily accessible, they weren't getting that kind of attention and that kind of care. You know, so that's one of the things that I think is important to recognize as we all find ourselves being survivors from 2020, right? And we've all felt alone in an island at some point, you know, and it's been those neighbors, those people next to us that have, you know, made it possible to continue and call ourselves survivors as well. You know, so this trip, you know, absolutely, thank you. You know, this trip started, we took this trip, Dan Fenstermacher, friend of mine and photographer, in June of 2018. Shortly, a month after, actually, I was laid off from my work in the supply chain and software industry. And that's a key point because there have been several portions in my life that have kind of moved me in this direction, right? And ending up here and being able to connect with the folks that we did, and just the way everything developed very organically, right? It was like, it almost as if it had to happen this way, right? And when we talk about change, right? Change sometimes seems like it's very difficult, like it takes a long time, right? But change can also happen right away. You know, in my case, there have been several, you know, changes around my life that have made, that have guided me in a certain direction. And that direction has led me to doing the kind of photography that I'm doing today, which is basically focusing on social justice matters, on underrepresented communities. Because I see photography for myself as a way to learn about me. Right? Because for so long, photography was something that I did on my own, almost as a meditative practice, you know? So a lot of, trips out to the coast. I don't know if you remember a show called Bay Area Backroads from back in the day. I
Oh
forget.
yeah, I used to
Channel
watch it
4
all the time. I loved it.
So that would be my show of inspiration, or for inspiration rather, right? So I became a member of KQED on one of their drives because they were offering these flashcards from Bay Area Backroads. And it was just flashcards for all the different areas that they covered throughout the year in their show, right? So I would pick a card, Jenner, pack my car, get my tripod, and head out.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, and it was always something I did on my own, right? Because we didn't have the same kind of community that we have now surrounding, visual arts and photography. And eventually that took me to not photography, but through work. I moved to New Hampshire, and I lived in New Hampshire for several years. And that takes me to the first time I went to Puerto Rico, which was in 2005, actually, December of 2005. I went there to photograph a wedding. I was only there for about a week, but I got a chance to, connect with the folks that I was there to work with. One, because one of them was a friend from work, right? So I came recommended. But really take in, the beautiful island. Puerto Rico is beautiful, right?
Friends and family have gone. They said it's really quite beautiful.
Absolutely, it's gorgeous. Absolutely gorgeous. It's just green and lush. The heat, the water, the music, the food, everything. Mm-hmm. But after my first visit, we had gone through different acquisitions at the company I was working with, and it just kind of it got tiring having to reorganize and re-implement new processes. I was the director of supply chain at the time, so I worked a lot with operations and things like that, right? So I decided to move back to California. So this was back in February 2006. Okay, I moved back to California. So what I'll do is I'll share a little slideshow that I put together for this part of the presentation, and kind of talk through some of the images and how we got here.
It sounds like there was some kind of a shift in your way about going about with photography, from more of a personal meditation to social awareness.
Yes, absolutely. There absolutely was. And, that was a process as well, and I think it's a process for a lot of us just here having grappling with sharing. Let me know when you can see the first image.
I can see it.
Fantastic. So when I moved to New Hampshire, I drove there. So I took all the northern states. And on the way back, as you can see back here, there's already snow. So it's February of 2006. So I decided to take all the southern states this time. And this is also the last time I paid $2.29.
Yeah, I was going to say the price of gas was like half of what we're paying now. So.
Yeah, exactly. So along the way, obviously went through different parts of the state, New York, Philadelphia, etc. And then eventually, made it out to the south. I was in Biloxi, Mississippi, and I couldn't get a place to stay the night. Partly because of all the destruction in Mississippi, and then partly because anything that had a vacancy, you had first responders that were there, or people that had been displaced and had to be evacuated were living in the hotels, motels, etc. So there was only one place that actually had vacancies, and it was the Isle of Capri Casino. But to stay the night was way out of my budget. It was over $300 a night, and I just needed a place to crash. So decided to keep going. But I remember driving around town looking for a place, right? And just seeing the devastation at night, it reminded me of like a scene of Escape from New York, driving by the Hard Rock Hotel and seeing the guitar just broken down, everything dark. So moved on, got to New Orleans. Now, February of 2016, we're 5 months post Hurricane Katrina. Okay, and I think most of us that were paying attention then remember the chaos of Katrina in New Orleans, right?
Right.
At the stadium and everything else.
It was devastation and just pandemonium.
Yeah. So the first couple of days that I got there, I wasn't driving. I've been driving for days, so I was burned out from driving. So did a lot of the typical tourist things, right? Went to the French Quarter, walked around, went to the Voodoo Museum, etc. Had the pastries, and so on. At this point of the trip, I was traveling with my ex-girlfriend, and she had to fly back to San Francisco. So the way I navigated my trip back to California from New Hampshire was using a GPS system. I just purchased a TomTom GPS. So I needed gas. So I put in point of interest, gas station. Obviously the GPS in those days, they're not smart like they are today.
No, not at all.
Right? Yeah, so it's no context of what's happening in the geography of the land that I'm trying to navigate. So it takes me through the 7th Ward, and I start driving into the neighborhoods, and I start seeing in the daytime, the level of destruction that occurred, in this place, right? And in this particular house in particular, stood out to me, right? Because everything, like both of the houses next to it, they're both fully erect, except for the one in the middle. Like everything, it's almost like everything underneath the roof got swept away.
Right.
And I just couldn't, I couldn't make sense of that, right? And also the only living thing that I noticed in these streets is this little cat that you see right here. That's the only presence of life that was left.
Right.
So I drove around, took a few images of the houses. You
didn't see any people about, or?
I saw one other person, but for the most part, this is what you saw: just emptiness, everything abandoned, nothing left, cars left behind. As you noticed in the previous image, a lot of the spray painting, right, that became infamous with this catastrophe, right? Basically, October 8th, a dog found dead on arrival.
Right.
On 10/3, no animals found. So this was the consistent theme that started to build up as I was diving deeper into exploring, what was left behind after Katrina. And this February, so the other thing that happens in February is Mardi Gras, right? So there was a whole discussion whether there was going to be an actual parade or not, and they did have a parade. And while I was there, I met some guy just standing on the street, introduced myself. He introduced himself. He said, I'm the most hated guy in FEMA right now, or I'm sorry, the most hated guy in New Orleans. And I said, oh, why is that? So I'm the director of FEMA. So, we kind of got into the whole deal, like why he is the most hated guy, right? He started talking about the need for property deeds and not being able to go in and fix houses and do the things that people want without a transfer of ownership, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? So this is the only other gentleman I saw in the streets, that those days I was cruising around, exploring, and he was basically walking on his own, almost having a fist fight in the air, can't even imagine, what could have been going through his mind. I mean, when you look around and, you find yourself in the situation, what do you reach for?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it brings out a lot of mental distress.
Yeah, absolutely. So, these are all images from Katrina. And, one of the things when I look back at this and when I start piecing all the pieces of the puzzle together and going back and just kind of thinking about, again, this timeline, this is another image that to me has a lot of resonance with what happened in Puerto Rico, right? Home is where the tarp is, right?
Right.
Puerto Rico became known, and FEMA became synonymous with these tarps in Puerto Rico as well, right? So it's not a new issue, right? The issues of infrastructure are not new, whether they're here, stateside, or in the island. You know, as well as, you know, discontent with the president that we have, right? And how that's a reflection of the kind of care and attention that the U.S. citizens get, right? You know, we think about Puerto Rico and, you know, and the president at the time, and the person that comes to mind is, you know, when Trump visited Puerto Rico and he's, you know, throwing paper towels across the room to people,
kind of like dusting it under the carpet, right?
Yeah, you know, and making a comparison how, you know, not that many people were lost and this, that, and the other, and it's just like, no, man, that's not.
It's not a very compassionate or intelligent thing to say.
Exactly, you know, but then we would experience the same thing just a few months later, you know, with the campfires. With
that devastation with the paradise and
yeah, exactly. You know, and you know, what was it that he said then, that we weren't sweeping the forest good enough.
Right, we weren't collecting the debris from the trees and such. So
exactly,
not the right answer.
Definitely not the right answer. Definitely not the right answer. You know, so that was it. So this was in 2006. Okay. I wouldn't go back to Puerto Rico until 2014. Went there on vacation. And the reason I bring that up is because this is actually a very key point in my photography as well, right? While I was on this trip in Puerto Rico, I met this other photographer while I was in Old San Juan. You know, and it's interesting because he asked me, he's like, oh, you know, they let you photograph with all that equipment. You know, I used to carry a big backpack with 2 DSLRs, 3 lenses, a tripod, yada, yada, yada.
It was a workout. It was a workout for everyone.
Total workout. And this guy was just carrying this tiny little bag. And I said, you know, so we started talking. I said, you know, what are you using as a camera? And he introduced me to the Leica system. He was shooting with the Leica M240 or an M9 and the monochrome. It's like, oh,
beautiful.
So yeah, so we ended up having, you know, dinner that evening. He started going into the zone system and you know, pre-focusing and all that, and I thought it was fascinating. And in a few weeks, I was traveling to Vietnam for work. So I said, oh, you know, why don't I buy a Leica? I don't have to carry my backpack, right? So I did. So a few weeks later, right before I left for my trip to Vietnam, I got the Leica, I got my lens, 35 millimeter, and I knew nothing about using a rangefinder. You know,
were you going film or were you going digital at that point?
I was going digital at that point. I was going digital at that point. I had wanted to go film, but he kind of talked me out of it. He's like, you know, don't go film first because it might just sit there and you may not even like it.
Yeah, logistically, it's hard too when you're out, you know, in a foreign place. You don't know where you're going to even get it processed. You just got to put it in a bag and carry it home.
Exactly. So I went with the digital version, the M240. You know, so the reason, and I know a lot of people say, you know, it's not about the gear and all that good stuff, and it's true. It's not about the gear, right? The best camera is the one that you have available when you want to make that image.
Exactly.
Absolutely true. However, for me, it completely changed the way I engage with the world. Right?
Why do you say that? Why do you say that technically or artistically?
Both, right? Because I'm now confined to a prime lens, 35 millimeter, no zoom. So if I want to get a close up, I have to walk in. I have to be present.
You have to engage. You have to engage and get in.
I have to be engaged, right? I won't have the comfort or that little security blanket of sitting across the street with a 70 to 200 lens, zooming into the face that I want, and creating the image. I have to be involved, right?
Which changes everything with your presence in the actual proxy of the shot, right?
That's right. That's right. So also, I mean, it completely changed my subject matter, right? Because it forced me to get intimate with humans, right? I mean, up to this point, I'm shooting landscapes, cityscapes. You'll notice that the photos that I showed of Katrina, they're all houses from far away, from the outside, right? I'm a spectator. I'm not really participating in the scene. I'm just spectating with my zoom lens and creating a photo, right? A snapshot.
Right.
So that process, it took me a few years to really find my place around, in that camera. I started with the 35, I said, and then it felt too wide, right? Because I was used to using a zoom lens and getting in tight. And I had been shooting fights. I had been shooting mixed martial arts and combat sports.
Did you feel there was distortion though when you went to 35, when you got in tight? I mean, did you feel like it was almost stretching it too far when you got in tight?
No, I didn't feel that at all, actually, because I didn't know how to do that.
Okay.
So I was still shooting from far away. So it's I had to put some training wheels in the process.
Yeah.
Right. So my training wheels was a 15mm lens, right? Because I could come up close and not necessarily have it up to my face and still get a photo that I can use later on. So I went from ultra wide to a 50, and then I landed on the 28 and 35. So from a technical standpoint, that's how that transition went, right? So then now we fast forward to 2018, another transition in terms of work, right? So in 2016, I chose to move back to California, left my job there. In 2018, I was laid off and decided to really pursue photography in a more serious fashion and really kind of dive in and give myself the space and the permission to embrace it completely. So in June, so a month later, Dan and I were talking. He had some time. He's a professor at Valley Green College, I think it's called, in San Jose. So he had time off. He said, "Why don't we go to Puerto Rico and see what's going on?" Right? Things locally had been calm. Most of the folks that said anything, the narrative was Puerto Rico's back to normal. Right.
That's what we were being told anyway.
Exactly. Bring in the tourist, right? Nothing to worry about.
Right. Which is an important element, obviously, for their economic well-being.
Absolutely. So I had a couple of contacts in Puerto Rico, photographers, and obviously the family that I photographed in 2005. But nobody had any real leads in terms of what we were looking to do and who we were trying to connect. So when we landed, the first thing we did was really just start putting this out into the universe. Any person that we spoke to, anyone that we saw, introducing ourselves, talking about what we're trying to do. And the first person that actually we connected with was our shuttle driver to the car rental company. So we just rented a small little car, and he introduced us to Betsy. Betsy Collazo is the founder of this organization called Relief for PR. And without her help, I mean, this project would not have come together.
She really stepped up and helped be a catalyst for this project.
Absolutely, without a doubt. We called her that same afternoon that we got there, and the next morning, we met up at a cafe. Again, told her what we're trying to do. And in that meeting, one of the things that was particularly striking was buying breakfast. I bought a breakfast sandwich. Yeah, and I just remember the breakfast sandwich, which is nothing fancy, just, standard cafe. It was like $12, $13. I was like, wow, $13 for a breakfast sandwich. It's like, okay, fine. But then that's what I would kind of compare. That was my baseline for the cost of living essentially in Puerto Rico, right? So one of the first places that we visited was Yabucoa. And Yabucoa is where the hurricane initially made landfall, right? This particular community called Sodomo was mostly affected while we were there. They still had no electricity, no running water. It had been 9 months since the hurricane. This is inside one of the buildings where they did, what are these called? Like a reunion hall, right? So if there was a party in the community, this is where they would have it, right? So it looks like the last party they had was maybe something for Mother's Day.
It's very touch. I mean, it's just very. It has a mood to itself. It's beautiful. It's really beautiful.
Thank you. And this is Maria Castro, no relation, but actually I have a sister named Maria Castro.
It's great.
So this reunion hall essentially became the triage location, right? So this is where folks from the community would come and pick up these water filters to use in their homes.
Because the water was contaminated at this point, right?
Yeah, well, the water's contaminated. They don't have any running water, right? So they're just collecting water and using the filtration system to make it drinkable.
Drinkable, right?
Yeah,
right. So there's electricity was knocked out. Water is not available.
That's right.
Right.
That's right.
Wow.
So this is outside of her home. Just in the main road that leads to throughout the community. And this is Rafael. Rafael is a police officer for the municipality of Yabucoa. And here we are at this is around the corner from Maria's house. And this is his dad's house. So right away, we start noticing the blue tarps.
Right.
Right. And that's just going to be a consistent theme throughout this whole.
What was the category? Was it a category 4 that hit the island? Do you remember?
It was a category 4. Yeah. One of the things that made that more impactful was that was a second category 4-5 hurricane within 2 weeks. So some of the folks that had been without water and electricity had been without water and electricity since Irma, actually, which was the hurricane.
So it was a 1-2 punch basically to these.
It was a 1-2 punch, exactly. So eventually we made it out of Yabucoa. We talked to Rafael and his dad, and we were driving towards the town of Isabela, which is right on the coast. And Isabela is where the family is that I photographed the wedding for back in 2005. So I had spoken to her. I was really excited to see her. She was able to get us lodging, but unfortunately we were not able to connect because of a family emergency, right? So the other element of this trip is that we were only there for a week.
That was amazing. When I looked at this work originally with you, I thought, well, he's got weeks here to develop this project and try to make these connections. So you really hustled, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, it was just a blitz. Like I said, I mean, from the first contact that we had with a human was their shuttle driver. And, luckily he was able to connect us with Betsy. We met with Betsy that next morning. And right after we spoke to her, we went to the grocery store. Actually, we drove out to Yabucoa, picked up supplies, water, etc., for us and for the people that we were going to be visiting. And we just head on. So when we got to Isabela, we were hanging out, waiting to connect with my connection over there. And we find out about this family emergency, right? So now we're basically looking at each other and just saying, shit, like we're going to lose a day without creating any content, without doing any work. It's like we didn't come to, drink rum and cokes by the beach, right? We came to work.
Right, right.
So we're sitting there going back and forth, you know, should we stay, should we go? But the people we were supposed to meet in the next town were not expecting us until the next day. So we went to get gas, and as we're getting gas, we see a car up ahead, also pumping gas with a logo from FEMA. It's like, oh, okay.
Wow, he's the guy, right?
Yeah, exactly. So Dan went to talk to him. Then we basically, I mean, it just came down to, hey, we're doing this project. Will you take us to your leader? You know, and he said, yeah, sure, no problem. It's like, okay, well, you know.
So people were very open to your inquiries and requests, it seems like.
Yeah, you know, everybody was very responsive. We didn't have any pushback from anyone that I can remember. Like I said, everything was just everything was just flowing, you know, just very organic, you know. You know, it always reminds me of you know, a quote from a Paulo Coelho book, you know, where it says, like, if you're following, and I'm not quoting it exactly, but it's like, essentially, if you're following your life's purpose, right? Essentially, life will provide and will guide you the way you need it to be guided. And, you know, and this is how it felt being in Puerto Rico doing this work. You know, people were just there and accessible, and
well, it looks like in this image, it looks like they're unloading a semi with water and supplies. What is that?
Yeah, exactly. So this is when we finally got to the warehouse where the FEMA folks were. This is it. This is the warehouse, and what they're doing is they're unloading these containers of water to fill this warehouse. You know, and he's the Secretary of Security for the city of Isabela. So we ended up having a conversation as well. And one of the things that I learned in this process is that this water, all this water that we see here, that people were lacking just 9 months prior, they had put in this requisition 3 years prior.
3 years.
So it took 3 years for this requisition to be approved and to be fulfilled.
Timing is everything, right?
Right. And, you know, water is one of the consistent things that we have to look at. It's almost a consistent thread when we look at all of the things that are happening around the world, right? So it's either water or lack of water.
So I guess the question I have is, that's an amazing statement. I guess what I would ask is, what did they do in between? I don't know what living thing can wait 3 years for clean water. So what were they doing in the meantime?
Well, it was just 3 years ago that they put the requisition in.
Right.
They, you know, the hurricane hadn't occurred yet.
Right.
Right. So these could have been provisions in preparation for a natural disaster.
I see.
But because it took 3 years, the natural disaster came and left.
Right. And
now they have water. But how many people died because of the lack of water?
Right.
You know?
And why? And the bigger question is, why did that take 3 years?
Yeah, exactly. You know, I mean, that's just the breakdown in the processes that's just consistent, right? And that's what people are angry about.
Right.
Right.
I mean, it's happening up with the camp, you know, the campfire up in Paradise. People are waiting and waiting, and it just seems to be stalled for God knows what.
That's right. You know, so this is another interesting connection for me. This is Alex. He's a pastor and a teacher in the town of Jayuya. And the reason this is an interesting connection for me, and again, I keep going back to all these different personal connections along the way, right? My brother-in-law's family is from a town next to Jayuya called Utuado. Okay, my brother-in-law works for Nissan in at the time it was I think he was in Mississippi. Yes, he was in Mississippi. So one of the Nissan has a program for their employees and their kids, and basically you can take your kids and you can put them into like a robotics camp, right? Where they
That
learn
sounds
how.
great.
Yeah, so they learn about robotics, and it's actually a competition. So they have the camp, they teach them everything, and then you compete on a worldwide stage. And you go to this, it's like a World Series of robotics, right? Well, Alex was actually involved in that same program, except in Puerto Rico. So he was basically teaching his kids how to assemble and disassemble these robotic, instruments without electricity, almost in the dark. So by touch. And they ended up competing in Atlanta the same year that my nephews were in Atlanta competing in the competition.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, so there's all these connections, that I continually see in the entire timeline of my life with this project, even though I was just here for a week, right?
Well, yeah, I think that what moved me though initially, and I want to share that with the audience, Harvey, is that when I saw these photographs that you've taken, obviously, and have here in this collection, the thing that's overriding is the immediacy and the intimacy and the poignancy and the power of what you've captured, obviously so beautifully. So I just wanted to point that out, that there is this cohesive strength in these images, hands down, and that's what drew me into this this project to begin with. Besides, it's a humanitarian issue, and it's also so beautifully documented photographically. So, I'm hats off to you on that.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you. I really appreciate that. And going back to what I said earlier about photography and my connection with photography, I mean, it's very personal, right? It's very personal, and it's very personal because, with this project, I think of this project and what it did for me, as a human, as a photographer, right? It really allowed me to put purpose behind a passion that's been consistent in my life, right? And that's important because along with finding that purpose, you're also finding your voice.
Right. I mean, you're
Right.
breathing the same air as these people that are dealing with this. I mean, you get to get on a plane and fly back to California,
Exactly.
but you're in the trench with these
That's right.
people, and you're taking that in. And you'd have to be completely devoid of humanity if you were not reacting and trying to gather that these powerful messages, basically, of what these people are going through, which again I think is so, it's so strong. I have a question here that I gathered earlier, but it was like, where does this project go beyond this point? What was your intent on the project, and where does this go next, to be a vehicle? I mean, not only photographically, but also for this bigger issue which you're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, one of the major goals that we had for this project was, beyond raising awareness, was finding a way to get enough funds to get electric generators, not electric, but solar generators, right? That's
Sure.
one of the things that was consistent because, when the hurricane first hit, if you had no power and you had a gas generator, well, you had no gas either, right? Because you're waiting in line 4 or 5 hours just to get $5 or $10 worth of gasoline. That's either going to go in your car, or how long is that going to, power your generator?
Right.
And then you have the cost associated to getting gas, right? Which, when you lost everything, and this is the situation these folks are in. It's like they lost everything. They didn't get a lot of help from FEMA, right? So everything was taken out of the house in the sun to dry out, and just continue striving and surviving. You know,
Imagine the roads were pretty messed up after the second storm, I would imagine, right?
the roads were very messed up, and again, that also created, you know, shifted the direction of this project while we were there.
Right.
You know, but one of the other thing that I talked about was community, right? And that was very present in every interaction that we had, every interaction. So for example, you know, we have Aurora, Yari over here on the right, and Kike, and this is Maria, right? So what she's showing her right now is how to, essentially how to assemble a solar powered light bulb so that they have power.
Really?
Right? Yeah.
Wow.
You know, so this is the solar panel right here.
Yeah, I see the panel.
Yeah. So essentially, we put it out in the sun, power it up so that they had light.
A couple hours of light at night, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
You know, and you know, I'm always drawn to the fact that we can all somehow find the strength to smile.
Right.
You know, they received, I think it was $600 from FEMA total. They live, I think it's roughly about $150 a month, both of them. So it's like $50 in food stamps and like $25 cash that they get as part of like a retirement or something like that.
Were these folks were retired, I would understand?
Yeah. So but and this is a good spot to talk about, you know, the issues with the deed, right? And how important it is to speak the local language and understand, you know, the complexities of the local communities, right?
Sure.
These folks have been living in this house their entire life, essentially, right? They moved to this area as kids. They met at the coffee plantations where their parents worked. They met at the age of 13, and they've been together ever since then.
Wow.
3 kids. They've been in this house their entire life. So, you know, as is the case in many situations, you know, the parents, you know, we're talking about early 1900s, right? They don't have a deed, right? This is where they live. This is where their work was. So the parents pass away and they leave it to their kids. And that was the case here. They didn't have a deed.
So right? the plantation owner gave them a plot of land and say you could build a small shack, basically.
Potentially, you know, that's the way it got passed down. You know,
right.
It's their property, their house, but there's no deed. But we have this: if you have no deed, you can't get any assistance, right?
Right.
So what do we do, right?
Yeah. What happens in the meantime?
What happens in the meantime? You know, when we got to Reinaldo's house, Reinaldo and his wife, this was one of the most tense exchanges that we had throughout the trip. I mean,
you can almost feel it. You can almost feel it in the image. I mean,
yeah, you feel it in the, you know, in the body language.
I mean, just the light from the tarp probably filtering the room, right? I mean,
and the light, absolutely. You know, I mean, blue is usually cold and cool, right?
Yeah, it's very surreal kind of coolness to it.
Yeah. You know, so he had a very negative experience with FEMA, right? I mean, he was going in with the same situation. He inherited the house, no deed. Eventually, they had to go with somebody that knew them from back in the day to certify and blah 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 blah. And they finally got
vouch for them that they were legit, right?
Exactly. You know, but one of his biggest gripes was the fact that, you know, people would come, representatives from FEMA would come to their house, you know, do a survey, say, "Wow, yes, you lost everything," but they wouldn't approve, you know, the reimbursement that he needed. You because things just didn't fit in those pretty little boxes.
They're
on the PDF.
they're cute little tied up boxes, right? Exactly.
Exactly. So like you said, I mean, this is what it's blue because the sun is the tarp, and this is very interesting because that evening we got back to our hotel room and I was downloading the photos and I was stuck over here on this one, and I thought to myself, how weird, why did my camera not pick up the correct white balance? Right. In the majority of these pictures where you're seeing a couple or a person in the middle of her in the portrait, I'm sitting directly across from them. Right. So I would try to compose my shot before I even started interviewing because I was not going to be moving around. And one of the things that I would do is just let them know, I'm going to be interviewing you, asking questions. And if I see something, I'm going to pick up my camera and take my photo, or take your photo, just continue as normal.
This gentleman seems like he's someplace else. I mean,
yeah, like
right.
I said, this was the exchange where there was the most conflict and trauma expressed verbally, as well as with body language, you can tell.
Sure, right.
So here we have the tarp, right? So they actually spent the whole time through the hurricane in their house, and the water was rising so high that they had to puncture a hole in the wall to release the water. And this is him in his bedroom. Continuing into the trip, this one here, this particular interaction was interesting. This couple, we're in the house of his sister, right? And we're again getting to know each other. She had a lot of health concerns. She was just diagnosed with colon cancer. She had larynx cancer, and she also suffers from vertigo. So he had been by her side since they got married years back, but her vertigo was so severe that he couldn't leave her alone, essentially, right? So one of the questions that I had was, how do you find what is your process for finding strength? I mean, you're
Good question.
You're dealing with all these challenges on a daily basis. You have to go get radiation therapy. There's no money in the bank. You have to decide gas or parking or food. And from the back of the room, I hear a voice saying, "She's stronger than he is."
Wow.
And I was like, okay. And automatically, I started to feel the tension and the uncomfort, right? And so I explored that question. It's like, why do you say that? Why is that? Is that a fact? So that created a space for her to really express herself and how she felt. Right? It's a vulnerable situation,
Sure.
but now we're in it. So now we have to explore it. We have to.
The cat's out of the bag, basically.
The cat's out of the bag. We have to unpackage this. And he started getting, teary-eyed and emotional. He's like, I can't talk about this. It's like
it's too much for him.
Too much for him. And she's like, yeah, that's the thing. She's like, I swallow my pain. I take on the pain so that he doesn't suffer.
Wow.
So we ended up having a conversation, and
that's that in itself is just a major statement, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And from this conversation towards the end, she thanked us for listening, thanked us for being there, thanked us for providing that space, and it just kind of, it brings home that monetarily is not the only way
Right.
to be there for someone. You know,
Well,
you don't.
you know, saving someone with obviously all these major hurdles and pain that she probably was dealing with. Just sometimes just listening and sitting with someone and listening can be monumental.
That's right. That's right. I mean, you don't always have to reach into your pocket, right? Sometimes you can just reach into your soul and provide,
Right.
you know, some humanity.
As human to human.
Absolutely. You know, it's like, you know, you walk by a person on the street and we judge first, right? And it's like, you know, you can change a person's life with a smile, right? You can smile with your eyes. You don't even have to move your mouth, right?
Right.
When you make that connection and people recognize it, you know, that's one of the things that is consistent. You know, when I connect with somebody, you know, they'll say, you know, thanks for seeing me. I mean, that's powerful, you know, because I think it's like, how do we get to a point where you feel invisible?
Yeah, I think that's you've touched on something that I think is very, very important, not just for these folks that are struggling here, but as a society, on a societal level. You know, do we really see one another? And if we spent, you know, even that very tight moment of recognizing, I see you, I see you here, I take you in. What does that cost us?
Doesn't cost us anything.
You know, is it an act of bravery to do that? I mean, you know, what you're saying is a really important thing.
Yeah, you know, it doesn't cost anything. It really doesn't cost anything, you know, but that doesn't mean it's free.
Right.
Either, right? It's not free because it requires you to take inventory of yourself.
Right.
Right. It requires to be comfortable with that reflection you see in the mirror.
And
right.
Be present.
Requires,
and be
present. Right. You have to see yourself first. You know, and how often do we just navigate the world not even knowing who we are?
Or do you see yourself in that other person?
That's right, and that's key.
No, right.
That's key. You know,
right.
You know, I look at my life and I see myself represented in every one of these stories. You know, that's me, that's my aunt, that's my sister, that's my mom, that's my dad. You know.
I know you had pictures. I don't know if you're getting to them, but you had pictures of younger kids and teens that were you had photographed near that area, I believe, too.
Yeah, I think I have some coming up. This is right before we left the town of Jayuya. We ran into the FEMA center. So same thing. Driving.
Was anybody home when you went there, or?
There was no one from FEMA there, just security guards. You know, but we got in. You know, we got in, and this is inside this. It was inside this auditorium.
Looks like an auditorium, right?
Yeah.
At a gym, right?
You know, so counseling service, volunteer organizations, local services. Empty.
But nobody was at the desks.
Right. You know, I mean, it's just representative of what people's experience were, right?
Wow.
Empty, right? These are the scenes from the sides of the road. You know, people leaving messages for their loved ones.
Houses knocked off their foundations, obviously, right? I mean, the landscape looks amazingly beautiful. But
it's gorgeous. It's gorgeous. You know, and then we touch back on the topic of mental health.
So what are we looking at here?
Here we are driving into the town of Utuado. This is where my brother-in-law's family is from. And in Utuado, there had been a lot of cases of suicide. So this is nothing more than a reminder of what daily life feels like in these communities.
So this is not a person hanging.
This is not a person. No, this is not a person. This is just, you know, like a scarecrow, essentially, just hanging from this tree on the side of the road.
Right. But it's a statement.
It's definitely a statement. You know, here we're looking at a top view, aerial view of what was on the right. You know, the home of this Mennonite pastor that lived there with their family, and the reconstruction going on the left with the help of the Mennonite folks out of Indiana.
See,
right? So this connection also happened by pure coincidence. When we got to the town, we drove around again looking for people to connect with, and we ended up at a senior home. They said we couldn't go in because it was past opening hours. So we drove up the mountain and started flying our drone to get some aerials, and we met John Schellenberger, who is who's the head of the project, and he invited us to come by the next morning and see their site. So this is their site where they're working. This is the pastor. You know, we had a conversation with her, and you know, and she said some things that were very poignant as well. You said, no, she lost everything. You know, we lost our home, we lost the church. She's like, but we weren't the only ones that lost everything. There was a community also that lost everything.
right.
You know, so her thing was how great it is to say that I stayed behind, you know, that I helped reconstruct Puerto Rico, you know, that I had a part in that story.
Right, right.
You know, so they invite us for lunch, you know, and these are the kids. These are the Schellenberger's kid, you know, with the son and daughter. He was actually visiting as well. He's one of the workers. He was visiting with one of the workers as well that were helping with the reconstruction.
Is that a little goat in that shot?
It's a little goat, yeah. Yep. And this is the crew. You know, this is all of them right before we left.
I'm just curious how they could build, you know, rebuild to withstand, you know, category 4+ going forward. I mean, what do you build with?
Well, I mean, I think that's where they're, you know, having more structure in the walls, right? I mean, you have what's this, like brick and rebar. You know, so they're bringing in new technology, new ways of building as well to protect them for future hurricanes or natural disasters. You know,
I see.
But building, the reconstruction effort is also difficult, right? Because you know, the supplies are going to be very expensive. The road conditions may not necessarily lend themselves to bringing in, you know, a truck full of bricks, that, you know, building supplies. You know, so it's all a challenge.
Right.
You know, this is the pastor inside her home.
Beautiful portrait.
Thank you. You know, and this is so now we're in the town of Utuado, right? And all of these folks still had no electricity. So, you know, we'd see a lot of these trucks going up and down. And one of the complaints that they had is that they never completed, well, one of the complaints that we heard from the folks that were, that we spoke to was that they would never complete a project. So they would start here, they'd work here for 2-3 days, and then they'd get transferred to another location. And there was no sense of when they were going to come back. There was no schedule. Everything was just kind of up in the air. And it was like that for months, right? You know, and so on our way to meet the next person, we're driving on this road and we encountered this huge boulder. And it says, people live here as well. The Boston, and then the hashtag Los Olvidados, which is the forgotten, right? And this is the hashtag that they had adopted to really get their story out, because that's how they felt. They were forgotten, right? They're in the mountains of Puerto Rico. And that's what Milagro in the video, she's the first one that spoke, and that's, that's what she's saying. Why don't you, why don't you visit, the villages? People live here also, so that's her cry for help and attention, right? And this is the only way after 3 months that anyone showed up to their house. And one of the dangers with this is that they live up this hill, and all of these, because there's multiple, there was like 3 boulders, they were all part of like a mudslide that ended up blocking the road, okay, and severing the access to them by vehicle. So as the water was rising as well, they really had no way out.
Oh, wow. How was the major town hit with this major storm? Were they also hit pretty hard?
They were hit pretty hard, but they had mostly started to to recover, to rebuild. Obviously, especially the tourist sections of San Juan, And Milagro is a diabetic. We saw her in the video. Her insulin, the way she keeps it cool is by putting it in an igloo cooler with ice when they have ice. Her daughter has cancer. Her granddaughter is chronic asthmatic. And the night before we met her, the granddaughter had a asthma attack, and they had to use a car battery for the ventilator. The car battery is now dead, so they didn't know what was next. And this is the void that they wake up with every day. What is going to happen today? Do we have light today? Do we have water today? What, and you have no control over that. This is Milagro. Daughter, granddaughter. And these are the roads, just constantly paving, constantly trying to repair.
Right.
For many reasons. I mean, that's one of the reasons that it was also so difficult to get power back up, because the road conditions are so bad. This is the pastor and his wife. We also met them in the town of Utuado. They live here with their special needs foster kids. So this is the generator, the gas power generator that they use to power up their fridge and things like that. But it's expensive. He's like, we're spending over $300 a month just on gas for this.
Oh. And where are they getting the funding to support themselves? I mean, if they're pastors, are they relying on their parishioners to help them? Or?
They got some help from FEMA, right? And other folks are just loans, personal loans, family, loans, debt on top of debt.
Right.
On top of debt, right? Because that's one of the things that's going on with Puerto Rico. So there's a huge debt in Puerto Rico as an island, as an institution.
Right.
And these are, 2 of the foster kids.
Which they adopted?
Foster kid. Yes, they adopted, and they have special needs, so they need to have electricity. So however they're gonna get that gas, they're gonna get it.
Right.
But they live about an hour away from town.
Really? Okay.
So there's an expense in gas just driving there and getting back.
Just getting back and forth, right? Exactly.
This is inside the parish. And when we're talking to her, obviously we talked. We asked about the same topic we've been hearing, mental health, and she said, yeah. She's like, absolutely. She's like, we don't say I have a mental health issue. We don't go to the hospital. She's like, but we cry. She's like, absolutely. There's sadness, and I cry, and this
right,
the reality of her life. And so let me go back to this real quick, and then I think we're getting close on time.
Right.
You know, because this is another reason we got here was also just pure coincidence and connecting and talking to people. You know, they were, like I said, way like an hour away from town, the town we were at. Had it not been for the guides that we met along the way, we would not have been able to reach them because of the road conditions. We needed a 4x4, and we're in the small, you know, 4-cylinder car. You know, so a lot of people helped us along the way, you know, and as much as it is about their situation, it's really more this project is more about the people, them, and their community. You know, which takes us to, you know, to Don Angel, right? This is Angel Gonzalez, 84-year-old. He had been living in his home here in the mountains of Jayuya by
This was his
himself.
home. This is his home here with the tarp on the roof.
With the tarp on his roof. It's just him and his dog, Paloma. Right. You know, so we met, we learned of his story through Yari and Aurora the day before. And then we got introduced to Kike, who has been the person that's been helping, had been helping Don Angel with supplies, water, whatever he needed. He would drive it up because he had a 4x4 vehicle. The roads were completely blocked off, so there was no access to his house. So we had to get up there really early on in the day to hike up and, you know, and meet him.
Do you have a picture in this slideshow of this gentleman?
Yeah. So I do have several pictures because this is how we're going to end it. So this is Angel. This is Don Angel and his dog Paloma.
Paloma?
You know, hiking up Paloma, which means bird. So this is him climbing up the hill, taking us back to show us his home. You know, and the interesting thing is when we started to walk up to his house, you know, we heard Paloma barking, and Kike said, "Oh, you know, Don Angel knows we're on our way up." He's like, "That's Paloma letting him know there's somebody here," right? You know, no sooner did he complete that sentence, you know, we see Don Angel on his way down, you know, with his walking stick and the hoe to go work on the road, removing boulders so that he could free up the access to the road to vehicles. You know, so we met him there. He took us up to his home, and you know, this is where he started introducing us to his living conditions, right? Here we see his fridge holding a can of Spam, turkey Spam, no power.
You said this gentleman was could not see?
Yeah, that's right. He had been legally blind for several years. You know, so the whole thing was like, what do you need? What kind of assistance can people provide for you? And you know, this stands out because you know, obviously we took supplies to him. We took some more of these solar light bulbs. We took water, which I think you may have seen on the table and all that. And like the only thing that he asked for, he's like, "Oh, the only thing that I want," it was like a gas canister, or actually no, a new gas stove, like one of these little like hot plate type scenarios. Here, you see this? That's a stovetop.
Like a Coleman stove with a propane?
It looks like a Coleman stove. Yeah, it's a propane stove. He's like, that's the only thing that I really need, right? In terms of water, right? Yeah, he was very proud of this. Very proud. He's like, "Kike," he's like, "I want them to see my sacred well." He's like, "Because this is where I get my water. This is where he gets his water." So Kike takes us to his sacred well, and this is it. What we didn't see, you know, in the house while we were there, was a filtering system. So there's that. You know, and he was also very proud of his health regimen, right? He next to his bed, this is his bed, this is his bedroom. The thing that was special for him was his nightstand, because on his nightstand he had a bottle of water, right, from his sacred well. He had vitamin C, he had aspirin, a little bit of sugar, and a little bit of salt. And his combination was a little bit of water with a little bit of salt for the kidneys, and then a little bit of sugar for the liver. He's like, and then I would take aspirin for my blood. He's like, and that keeps me healthy. So he's taken us into his bedroom to kind of show us his, you know, his secret to health.
How did he get food in and out? Did people help him in the neighborhood, or?
Yeah, so Kike is the one that's been more active, that had been active in terms of getting supplies to him.
Okay.
Yari, who we saw in the previous photos, Yari, her husband, and her daughter actually hiked up from their home to Don Angel's home the day after the storm, because he passed the storm inside his house. They hiked up to get him out and bring him home and take care of him at their home. You know, one of the things that happened along the way is that when we got to the town of Utuado, we couldn't continue because of weather conditions. But I had been introduced to Caridad Sorondo, and Caridad Sorondo is a historian and documentarian as well, and she had been tasked with doing a story on the town of Morovis in Puerto Rico for their centennial. And when she got to the town, she said, I can't really do a feel-good story about this town and the celebration with the level of destruction. So when we got to Utuado, we were actually going to Morovis to meet with the folks that she had connected us with. But because of the weather conditions, we could not move on. So while I was there, you know, I sent her some information about Don Angel, his situation, and some photos. And then she and Betsy and a woman named Mercedes, they essentially created this grassroots mutual aid campaign to provide assistance to Don Angel. You know, basically putting out there, using all their social networks, with the cry of saying, you know, we can't allow our elders to be living in these conditions.
Right.
You know, and that triggered, so that triggered a whole movement of mutual aid and support, to the point where a local news agency went to do a story on Don Angel. That story made it to the governor and his wife, and they ended up donating some things and really taking ownership or accountability of his case. You know, so these are.
I was going to ask if people want to find more information and ideally donate as well to the organizations. Is that on your website?
Yeah, so that's going to be on my website. And when they go to my website to the project, which is Los Olvidados, there's going to be a section there with some links that they can use to donate. This is Yadi's husband. So to end the story, a lot of people were involved in providing assistance to Don Angel. And within weeks after we were there, his whole home got renovated, right? So here we see, and these were all photos that I would get from folks saying, keeping me up to date on, you know, what was happening locally. So this is Yadi's husband assembling, it looks like a frame for a sofa. You know, this is Angel, Don Angel getting a haircut, and this is Yadi's daughter cutting his hair. You know, this is him in his new lounge chair that was donated by, I think this one was donated by the governor and his wife. You know, so slowly you start seeing the change around his environment, right? Around his house. You know, he's clean shaven, haircut. They painted his house. You know, here he is in this is his bedroom now. You know,
it's like he has a
new bed, painted walls. Looks like he has carpeting, new door. You know, and this is everybody celebrating him and everybody that helped put together. And this is Yadi right here. So right away you start noticing the difference. I mean, this is the same house that we were in.
Right.
This is his kitchen now.
Wow.
This was his kitchen. Somebody donated solar panels. And then he had power, little television, solar panels that were installed, new living room set. I think this was donated by the governor and his wife as well. New bathroom set up, right? He was able to get a new bathroom because he had a septic system installed and donated as well. Right. This is the same place where I took his photos.
Amazing.
And then, so one of the things that came out of this, it's like, so we go back to, this image, and we see all of these things. We see Angel in this situation. You think, and this is kind of the struggle as a photographer, somebody, being involved so deeply, is that, you start to question it. So like, right now, if the project ended here, right? If the project ended here, you say to yourself, wow, I helped, I contributed, right? But the story didn't end there, right? These pictures stopped coming in, right? And the reason these pictures stopped coming in was because, a few weeks after Donan had committed suicide, he took his own life, and so as a photographer, as somebody that was involved, in a way, changing all of this, you say, man, maybe if I wasn't there, he would still be alive,
Oh.
So you start questioning, and I sat with this body of work for some time, trying to reconcile, all of this, but every now and then I would get, like little signals that we were in the right path, for example, right?
Right.
And so when we go back to connections, Dan is part of BAPSI, Bay Area Photo Collective. Right? BAPSI was, one of the founders of BAPSI is a man called Frank Espada. Is it Frank Espada? Yeah, Frank Espada, who was born in Puerto Rico and did a body of work in New York on the Puerto Rican diaspora, right? And a few months after the trip, there was a gallery showing of from BAPSI, and it was also a fundraiser. So they were auctioning off a signed poster from Frank Espada's body of work. So I bought a ticket, and I was joking. I was like, I'm gonna win this.
Oh.
It's like I just need one ticket, but everybody else keep buying because we're trying to raise some funds, right? So they say, okay, well, Dan, why don't you pick the winner, right? So they got the fishbowl, pull out the ticket, and as he's pulling out the ticket, I said, Harvey Castro, right? And then he reads out the name on the ticket. He says, Harvey Castro. And at first I thought, he's just,
He's punking you.
Yeah, he's joking around, he's going along with the joke, but he wasn't, I think it was Jean Dominique that, confirmed it and said, Harvey Castro. So then we get the, so I get the prize. The prize was this framed signed poster from Frank Espada, right?
That's great. That's wonderful.
So the connection there is the following. Oops. Are you able to see my screen still?
No.
Oh, sorry. Because this is
I think the poster was on last, and then that was it.
Can you see it now?
I can see all of the thumbnails.
Okay. All right, here we go. We're coming up on this. Okay, it's not letting me share. But anyways, so I'll talk real quick about that poster. So that poster is of this little girl in New York, right? That's part of the series that Franca Espada put together, and her name is Paloma.
Oh, wow.
Paloma being the name of Angel's, companion. Right. So I've used these little key things to kind of reconcile my relationship with this body of work and kind of the doubts and everything else that come along with, learning about this, the ending of this story for Don Angel. But then it's also like the story hasn't ended for him, because he continues to, through his soul and his energy that he passed on in these images, he continues to help people. When I first put this body of work out last year, I was going to be part of the Los Angeles Center of Photography Project 2020. Right? And that was supposed to open 1 week after, it happened to be 1 week after the shutdown for COVID. So there was never an opening to the public, but it went online. And because it went online, somebody from the Boys and Girls Club of Los Angeles reached out to me because they wanted to use the photo of Angel holding that can of Spam as part of their fundraising campaign, because they had run out of funds. And they said, this image reflects the need that we have right now for these kids. And they were in the middle of, this is April, May, in the middle of the pandemic, So I look at it as another way that he has been constant and still provides assistance and, his selflessness.
Well, it's an inspiration. It's an inspiration. I mean, I wanted to ask you, and congratulations on this body of work. It's really, really, really strong and powerful and beautifully presented. So I thank you for that. And I thought it had, so much merit on both levels, with the humanitarian level and the photographic level, which was, I thought, important for the audience and important to get the message out too, because we're all facing these very, in some ways, very parallel catastrophes in our lives. And it's a kind of a microcosm lesson in a way. What are you planning to do with this body of work? What's next for this project? I mean, what's next for you? What are you doing with this current beautiful project itself, Harvey?
Yeah, well, thank you. Thanks for those kind words, Dave. And in terms of the project, I mean, I see this theme continuing, right? I mean, so for example, we start with Katrina on the outside, then we go with Maria on the inside. But I want to explore all the other elements of these communities that are affected by that, right? And unfortunately, we have so many natural disasters that are so common now, right? My home country of Nicaragua in 2020 was hit by back-to-back hurricanes. So you have Honduras and Nicaragua that were the most affected areas of Central America, hit by back-to-back category 4 and 5 hurricanes, similar as Puerto Rico with 2018, right? So another topic that's very close and intimate to me is the topic of immigration, right? So now we're looking at immigration and we're looking at climate change, right? And those things are consistent. We look at what happened in Texas just recently this year with the freeze, the deep freeze, right? So my goal for this project is to have this be a chapter of a bigger body of work that starts to connect all these different stories as what they are. It's just one story of humanity.
Are you planning on going to the border then, from what you just said?
I am, yeah. I'm planning to go to Guatemala, maybe Honduras, and then connecting all of those pieces to the immigrant experience from the perspective of a dreamer, but even going deeper into looking at the differences and how the challenges of identity as an immigrant child, dreamer, depending on where you land, in the United States, because your experience is going to be different whether you landed in North Oakland, West Oakland, or East Oakland, for example, right? And the people you have around you, and even like where do you come from in Mexico? Where do you come from in Nicaragua, in Central America, Honduras? It's going to be a different experience as you try to find place in this world, you know, and I'm interested in capturing that and understanding that and communicating the way I see it and the way I experience it as an immigrant child myself.
I mean, I'm always concerned, and I'm sure we all are, when these people are coming into at the border, coming in because they're trying to find refuge and trying to find a new life. And it's like, where do they go? Where do they get assimilated? You know, what happens next? You know, and that's a huge question mark for all of us here in the States, of course, and of course for these immigrants that are coming in as well. It's like, well, where is there a place for you? Where is there work for you? Where is there a housing for you? There's a reality part to all of that, food, water, shelter. And so, how does that all get assimilated with, I don't know how many people are coming in at this point in time. And it's like, that's a big question mark. It's like, well, how does this work? I mean, where do these folks go that have basically a backpack on their back, and that's kind of it? So, how does that next phase of rebuilding a life happen?
Yeah, I mean, those are very good questions, and those are questions that are coming from you. So, those are also questions that these people have, right? So one of the things that we need to keep in mind is that the majority of immigrants don't come here because they wanted to, right? We're crossing the border and entering this new land already carrying a lot of trauma.
Yeah.
And then those questions, and when you don't find representation, right? When you're growing up and the images you see are not images that reflect or represent you, it becomes even more difficult. And that's what I was talking about earlier when I said about finding your voice, right? So for example, and I look at myself as a young immigrant growing up in the Bay Area in the 80s, 90s, right? Western movies were popular in my family. My dad liked watching John Wayne and Clint Eastwood and things like that.
Right.
But as you grow up and this is the imaging that you're consuming, and you get older and you start saying, this doesn't quite seem correct. That doesn't jive with me, right? I think of movies like The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Who's the ugly, right? The Latin guy, the Mexican guy.
Yeah, it's a very surreal sort of script that they conjure up to make into this new reality, which is kind of a fantasy reality, I guess. Right. So I think some very creative writers and directors in Hollywood that have sort of perpetuated that myth for a very long period of time, that we as participants in watching these films take in and assume that's reality because it's presented in a photographic or cinematic fashion. And that's a really good point to make. I've been reading a lot about Richard Avedon again, and he said no photograph is the ultimate truth, meaning when you take a portrait of someone, especially his point was when you take a portrait of someone, it's that moment that he is seeking as a photographer to get something real. But that person is so multifaceted that person can come off very, jovial in one shot, and in the next shot be in, a contemplative or in a more depressed state. So which of those four is the real person?
Yeah.
So it's a very loaded question. And we take as photographers and viewers of photography as that is real, and a good portion of it is, but I think it's a great question to ask as far as what part of that is reality. And I think we have to be actively engaged with it. I could see this thing turning into a larger show. I know you had a a few pieces in Los Angeles.
Mhm.
I don't know how many pieces were in that show, 6 or 8 pieces.
Yeah, I think I had 8 pieces in that show.
You know, it'd be worth discussing this down the road for a larger, you know, expose with actual prints, because there is such a different beauty, as you know, with projected work on a screen versus an actual real honest to God print that you can walk up to. So we can talk about that later.
Yeah, I'd love to.
We're getting really close on time, so I didn't know if there was any last point you wanted to make. Again, we were recording this, we will post it. We apologize for any kind of technical glitch. I don't really know what happened with Zoom, to be honest, our first major glitch, but we have recorded it for folks to come in and dial in and take a look at it. So I wanted to thank you, Harvey, for the fantastic project, the heart, you know, you sink heart into the project. It's evident. That's what moved me on this project, to get behind this project with you, because I think it, as we talked many times before, about the humanitarian level of visibility, and we really are you know, we're on one planet, we're the same species. We you know, we bleed when we get cut, we hurt, you know, we have joy, we have challenge, you know, and I think there's, you know, these major catastrophes, the fires, the earthquakes, the hurricanes, really sort of echo, you know, our humanity and how we support one another in this, you know, this beautiful globe that's, you know, that is a really, in some ways, a very beautiful place, but a very challenging place. And so, you know, how do we collectively, as a global community, help each other, which these people obviously in Puerto Rico were, you know, thank God they were getting help, and some, you know, helping each other in the midst of making that work. So I want to thank you for that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you. I mean, thank you and Harvey Milk for, you know, for investing in putting this story out there. I mean, I think it's important. You know, it's you know, everything that we're dealing with today is just a microcosm of what Puerto Rico has been dealing with for 100 years of colonization from the United States. You know, that lack of representation that we all are looking to claim in our own lives is the same cry of independence that they've been looking for, because of that lack of representation.
Right. And having a voice of like what you said earlier, like to just be present and see that individual, that person.
Absolutely.
And be able to say, you know, what can we do to help make change happen? Obviously, to undo that mold that doesn't fit that checkbox, so that we can make those adjustments, because that's really what it's about. I mean, we all have to morph and ebb and flow with what's coming at us, no matter what that is.
That's right.
And so that's survival. That's how the species has survived.
Exactly.
And so taking that lesson home, it's like, you know, we have to move with the tide. We have to move with what's happening, whether we like it or not. We have to do what the best that we can muster, because, you know, we have an investment, obviously, in moving forward.
Absolutely.
Together, and I think being present and recognizing that. So that would be my last comment. Thank you, Harvey. I really appreciate it. I'm you know, want to thank the people of Puerto Rico as well at this moment in time. And I guess I wanted to mention lastly, again, if go to Harvey's website to find out more about this particular project and the organizations that are supporting these people, obviously rebuilding their lives at this point in time. And we look forward to seeing you again. Don't forget to donate generously to the Friends of Harvey Milk Photo Center. It allows us to continue these kind of beautiful webinars going forward. So on that note, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I know.